Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adrienne Smith. I'm with the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition. It is 2 p.m. Mountain Time here in sunny New Mexico. And we're really excited about this afternoon's session. We have a very high-level group of people with us today, and a very high-level audience participation with us today. I'm with the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition. As I said, we're going to talk to you about navigating self-sufficiency using the CLIF New Mexico tools. The two folks that I have with me today are Stephen Shepelwich, Senior Community Development Advisor of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City being one of those two districts for the state of New Mexico. The other guest that I have with me today here is John Reese. He's a Senior Advisor for Community and Economic Development, Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And it's the Atlanta Fed that has created this CLIF tool. So next slide, please, Dana. And Dana Howarth is here today. Sorry about that, Dana. Dana's the Deputy Director for New Mexico Caregivers Coalition. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So we're going to talk to you today about CLIF. Right after I give you a little bit of background on the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition, we're going to talk to you about why the Federal Reserve Bank system cares about benefits CLIF. In other words, just a little background of how this got started. John Reese is going to talk about demonstrations and the way that CLIF can be used in a kind of high-level way. So what we'd like for you to be thinking about is, where do you see yourself in the big picture of this presentation by John? Then we'll come back and I'll talk to you a little bit about how the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition has used CLIF. And then we want to give you some time to give us some feedback about how you see yourself and your organization using CLIF. And then we'll adjourn by 3:30 p.m. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background on the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition. We evolved from a series of statewide listening sessions where we went around the state and heard from caregivers back in 2009. And we have done 5 different series of those listening sessions since our inception. We just got off of a rural southeastern New Mexico tour where we conducted 10 listening sessions around southeastern New Mexico to hear from caregivers. And we do that for a lot of different reasons. We do that to validate that the direction that we're going in is still relevant to caregivers. And then we're always looking for caregivers to give us feedback on the wages they're actually making and the ways that they're actually working, notwithstanding what the data tells us. But we learn a lot of nuance, we pick up on a lot of the subtlety on how caregivers are working in the field, maybe that the data can't really tell. We're always looking for ways to advocate for caregivers. That's not only wages and benefits, but just better ways for them to work, better ways and more frequent ways for them to, say, take on professional development and social development, so that, as one example, so that a caregiver in Artesia doesn't get nervous that her boss in Artesia, when her boss sees her having lunch with somebody in Carlsbad. We've actually had somebody say that they were nervous about that kind of thing. Next slide. And we come at this from not a healthcare perspective, but from a workforce development perspective. And in these last 3 years, we've been working with PHI, a nationally recognized organization that did a lot of great work for us around some advocacy and really around the data too. We know that all direct care workers, that this field has been exploding for the last 10 years. And we are always looking for ways for state and local policymakers and federal policymakers too to take advantage of that explosion, but really mostly to demonstrate how they value caregivers. So you'll see that this this graph actually fits what has been going on for many years. Home health and personal care attendants and aides, that workforce has been increasing while the share of nursing assistants who work in institutional settings has been declining a little bit. We are in New Mexico about to become the 4th highest ranked state in the country of people ages 65 and older. So this workforce is going nowhere as far as I can tell, but up. Next slide, please. And who are these caregivers in New Mexico? Well, you know them already, those of you who are here today, and it won't surprise you that 83% of them are women. Between 81 and 82% are people of color. That's males and females, and 17% are immigrants. Next slide, please. And just back one more, please, Dana. Thank you. So the wages that caregivers were making in 2019 actually declined in real terms. So these numbers are a little bit old, and you know that our governor started a statewide minimum wage increase in 2019, and it's really up to $12 minimum right now. That's where it stands today. But I want to give you a sense of, and maybe put in your mind, perhaps why a lot of people have already left this sector. So their wages actually declined in a 10-year period from 2009 to 2019. More than half of them work part-time, and we know this from talking to them too. They're often juggling 2 and even 3 jobs just to make ends meet. That's true now as much as it ever was. So these numbers, again, a little dated, but from 2019, their median annual earnings were $12,800 a year. And next slide, please. So some of the things that we've been developing in these years since their creation, we put a heavy emphasis on training of caregivers, and we do that not only to develop their core skills and competencies, but also to recognize them and to demonstrate value and to lift morale at every opportunity that we can. So we develop and deliver trainings that result in well-trained and knowledgeable caregivers. And over these last 3 years since COVID-19, we have many more both paid and unpaid family caregivers who are part of, we don't charge a membership fee, but are part of the Caregivers Coalition. So we train around all of these different areas. This is just a few of those modules that we train on, but it's not only infection prevention and safe transferring mobility and self-care, which crosses both the personal care workers and the developmental disability waiver caregivers, but some of them are actually specific to people who are elderly. And then on the other hand, some of the trainings that we conduct are specific to people on the developmental disabilities waiver program. And all training is provided at no cost to caregivers. We never want to charge caregivers for anything that we do. And next slide, please. And here's the crux of today. We put on our website, and we'll show you a little bit about that toward the end. This is on our website, a public assistance benefits test. And we are pushing this out to state policymakers, local policymakers, all of you who are on today in education, nonprofit field, and advocates for this work. And that's what we'll be talking about today. And as we move and transition to Steve Shepelwich, I'll just give you one example of the way that we are using Cliff, and ask you to think about this for yourself. An example of why we care. In the 2023 legislative session, we worked very closely with the Association of Developmental Disabilities Community Providers to raise reimbursement rates for caregivers who work on the DD waiver program. So these are Medicaid funded people, care recipients, And those caregivers in that system are most often called direct support professionals, DSPs. So we're able to model and show what these workers are actually making and what happens to them when they make just a little bit too much money and fall off that benefits cliff. We actually found out that during COVID, there was one agency in Santa Fe who offered $2 an hour more to every single caregiver in her company. And we know of at least 2 caregivers who pushed back and said, I'm sorry, thank you, but I can't take it. I can't take that raise. I don't want to accept that raise because I'll lose my own Medicaid. So that's kind of sad to say that these workers are often, I don't know about most often, often qualify for Medicaid themselves. So on that unhappy note, I have the happy privilege, on the other hand, of introducing a longtime colleague, Stephen Shepelwich, and thank you so much for helping us do this today, Steve.
Well, thanks so much, Adrian. I appreciate you providing that overview of your organization. One of the questions that people often ask is, why is the Federal Reserve involved in this work? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll hand it over to John Reese to dive into the actual tools. But the overall mission of the Federal Reserve is to have a strong economy and a stable economy for the country as a whole. And usually when people think of the Federal Reserve, they think about the actions, for example, that we took just yesterday around interest rates at the national level. And those types of decisions are around having a strong and stable economy for the country as a whole. But we believe for that to happen, everybody must be able to benefit from the economy as well as participate in the economy. And with that rationale, we have our community development department that's focused on a range of issues affecting low and moderate income communities. One of those issues that's been long-standing in the communities we serve is this issue of public benefits and benefits cliffs. And it's something that that is a barrier for people as they participate in the economy. Around 1 out of 4 individuals have some type of public benefit that is income eligible. And so it's a widespread issue. A lot of people are affected. It's an issue that's very complicated and not transparent. It's hard to know where your benefits, how they can phase out over time, how they would be affected by different decisions. And so there's not a lot of transparency around them. And to make it even more difficult is that they have such dramatic consequences if you do lose those benefits. And these are benefits that can range from child tax credits to child care subsidies, rental subsidies, earned income tax credits, potential resources for college or other education. And so people are very concerned about losing those benefits. I was first exposed to this issue of benefits cliffs early in my career, basically about 20 years ago now, when I was opening up savings accounts for a very small credit union. And I was working with residents of a public housing units, trying to get them to open up a savings account. And I remember one woman said, I have the money to open it. I would like to open a savings account, but I'm afraid if I do, then I could lose my benefits. They would be able to know how much I have and track it. I don't know if she had too much to be eligible or not, but the issue was that she was afraid of it, and she backed away from using one of the tools that most of us consider to be foundational to economic stability, just a basic savings account. Over those 20 some odd years, continue to run across this issue of benefits cliffs in different ways. Pretty much any sector you work in, when you're working with low or moderate income individuals, you'll come up against it. Affordable housing, small business development, education, financial education. You will meet clients that are facing the benefits cliffs. You'll hear stories about it. And overall, the reaction has usually been it's patchwork. How do we get around it? How do we deal with it? It's like it's the water we swim in. We take it as a given, and we try to do workarounds around the issue. About 2 or 3 years ago now, I heard about the work that the Atlanta Fed is doing, which you're going to hear about from John Reese. And it just really grabbed me. I started looking into it, and it was exciting because it was extremely practical. It wasn't just how to work around issues, but it was how to help an individual make specific choices that would affect their lives. By peeling back that non-transparency around the issue, being able to get a clear view of where the benefits, what benefits you may be eligible for, but it also how those benefits can change over time, and the consequences of decisions that you can make about taking, moving forward in a career. All of those came together in a very practical way that counselors can use on the front lines to work with individuals. Also, as Adrian said, it can be used to model out policy choices as well. So you're actually changing the full structure around benefits at the state level, and ideally down the road, the federal level. So it's some exciting work, and that's really why our bank, the Kansas City Fed, is involved in this work. It's to take a tool that the Atlanta Fed has developed and supports, and to help bring that into our district, which includes New Mexico, to see how it can be used. And as you'll hear, there are many different use cases that John will talk about, and we've seen those in our district, from counselors to policy decision makers, looking at how we can change these structures that inhibit individuals from really getting financial and economic mobility. So with that, I'll hand it over to John to talk about the details. I know every time I see presentations on this, I learn something new. There's a lot of information. I encourage you to really get the big picture and then work with Adrian and the Atlanta Fed staff to really dive in to see how you can put this in place in New Mexico to come together to make some real change. So with that, I'll hand it over to my partner from Atlanta, John Reese.
Thank you very much, Steve. You can go, I think, sort of 2 slides forward, or let's see, 1 slide forward, Dana. You can go to the next slide. Again, thank you very much, Adrian and Steve, for the nice introduction and context setting. Again, my name is John Reese with the Federal Reserve in Atlanta as part of our Advancing Careers for Low-Income Families initiative, which is really fundamentally focused on how do we improve economic mobility for low and moderate income individuals. And we have identified this issue of benefits cliff as hopefully one area where we can really move the needle, because it plays to a lot of our strengths as far as engagement and individual communities, but also our capacity to develop fairly sophisticated tools to understand this issue, some of which you'll see later today. Unlike Steve's focus is sort of geographically bounded for his district, the Advancing Careers for Low Income initiative is nationwide. So we're working in, and you'll see a map later in this presentation, in communities throughout the country, because as both Adrian and Steve have alluded to, it's a very prevalent issue that does impact a lot of communities throughout the country, regardless of where specifically you're located. You can go to the next slide. Just in case anybody isn't intimately familiar with it, let me just give a very, again, straightforward definition. It's always sort of interesting to see where people sort of fall in their understanding of this. I'm always surprised by how many people have either not heard of it, right? Because as we'll see in a second, it is very prevalent. But there are also a lot of people who are very familiar with the actual phenomenon, but just haven't heard of the word or the phrase benefits cliff previously. So it's basically a barrier to economic mobility that exists when someone's career advancement puts them at risk of losing public assistance, and ultimately makes them worse off, right? That they either take on additional hours or get a wage increase, and let's say they make an extra $100 a month in take-home pay, but they end up losing $200 in public assistance. And so it can create some very real disincentives that can be quite stark, right? There are instances in which individuals may have gotten a 10% wage increase and end up losing hundreds of dollars in public assistance. And one of the reasons this exists is because we have a very sort of patchwork system, which you'll see in a second. And so we have created what we call our policy rules database. You go to the next slide. That policy rules database is basically an engine that has all the eligibility criteria for the major public assistance programs in this country and allows individuals to see, again, how sort of a change in hours, wages, or career trajectory may potentially impact their public assistance. We have used that engine, that is the policy rules database, to create our CLIF suite of tools. Again, I'm going to highlight these in a moment, that ultimately drive, I think, activities across several areas. One of which is community engagement, right? Because there are so many either individuals who are not aware or constituencies such as Adrian and the Caregivers Coalition that are trying to sort of lift this issue up. We continue to do a lot of education on this topic, and we leverage the tool to do so. We also do a lot of research and policy analysis, right? That if we change specific policies or there was a change in circumstances, what might the implications of that? And we can use the CLIF tools to do that. We also use them in a career and financial coaching situation. Because this is such a complex calculation, I think Steve alluded to this earlier, people don't always understand when they're going to experience a cliff. And so the temptation is to often, and there can be very good reasons to do this, is to kind of keep your head down and don't make any changes to your situation, because that's the only way you know that you won't experience a cliff, right? If you don't change your hours, if you don't open up that checking account. But our tool in a coaching situation can help people make more informed choices and ultimately, hopefully, improve their situation. And then finally, employer solutions is that a lot of employers, one, either don't know about the benefits cliff tool or they don't know sort of how to mitigate it. We're starting to work with employers to try to identify career paths that at the very least will mitigate benefits cliffs as someone sort of goes along their professional journey, or to come up with certain solutions, right? There's some interesting sort of both from an employer side of things and some legislative changes that have empowered employers to address this in some creative ways. So again, we're leveraging these tools for a myriad of activities. You can actually go through the next couple of slides to where we see the impact of benefits cliffs. Again, that's perfect. Again, as Steve said, I think individuals often associate the Federal Reserve with sort of our stable prices and setting interest rates, but we're really interested also as part of our dual mandate in maximum employment. And so if we can address the benefits cliff, the hope ultimately is that we can advance maximum employment. And one of the reasons we suspect, this is such a significant impediment to maximum employment is, again, because of how prevalent it is, right? That the impacts of benefits cliff hit workers, they hit employers, and they hit governments, all of whom have an interest in addressing this. You can go to the next slide. We've done a survey a couple of years back where we asked workers in Alabama, had they ever declined to take a new job or promotion because of the fear of losing government assistance. You can go to the next slide. And as you'll see here, very commonplace, right? That close to 40% of those surveyed said that they had delayed a new job or turned down a job or promotion because of the fear of losing government assistance. So again, particularly in an era of sort of low unemployment, or in a situation like in New Mexico, where you've got a very fast growing demand, anything you can do to sort of move the needle and incentivize people to work, I think is ultimately to be encouraged. And obviously this issue is something that can potentially discourage people, right? If you have 40% of workers making decisions around the benefits cliff, addressing that can really help move the needle on workforce availability. Next slide. On the employer side, we've similarly asked employers, this is actually based on a survey that we conducted in Florida, where we asked individuals at companies, had they ever had workers turn down promotions, wage increases, or hours because of the fear of experiencing a benefits cliff. And again, not quite a size. You can go to the next slide, Tatum. but still, again, very commonplace, right? That 1 in 3 employers say that the benefits cliff is impacting decisions of their workers. Again, so very, very widespread phenomenon. And finally, go to the next slide. On the sort of government side, if we can transition individuals from, experiencing benefits cliffs, receiving benefits, to sort of advancing to other career pathways, it can deliver pretty significant fiscal dividends to the public, right? So this is a scenario in which someone that goes from working as a sort of a cashier to a licensed practical nurse over their lifetime, they're going to generate an additional $300,000 in additional tax revenue because of that change. So again, a lot of different sort of stakeholders have an interest, I think, in addressing this, which again might sort of suggest, well, if everybody has an interest in this, why does this issue exist? Then you go to the next slide. And a lot of it is because there are so many different programs with different eligibility criteria that create some unintended consequence and just overall complexity. So it's one of the reasons, one, why this issue exists, and two, as we've alluded to several times, why workers can have such a difficult time understanding when and where they might experience a cliff, right? Because you need to know all the individual circumstances, all the eligibility criteria, which again are very complicated, and ultimately one of the reasons we've created our tool. And next slide. As we'll sort of see in a second, one of the reasons our tool sort of focuses on overall resources. I think Adrian's figured that sort of the median annual wage take-home pay for a caregiver in New Mexico is around $13,000. And so we know for a lot of individuals in that situation, public assistance is a vital additional source of resources. So we can't just look at income when we're looking at if someone's going to be better off. We also have to take into consideration the public assistance they receive. Because again, just like the example, right, there are instances in which you might receive a $100 wage increase a month, but if you lose $200 or $300 in public assistance because of that wage increase, you're fundamentally going to have fewer resources. It's going to be harder to pay your bills, put food on the table, and keep a roof over your head. And so all of our work is embedded in this framework of what we call annual net financial resources. You go to the next slide, which includes, basically, do you have enough resources to pay your expenses, right? So we look at not only income and public assistance, but the overall level of expenses in your community, right? So if you're using our tool in New Mexico or in Albuquerque or Los Alamos, you're going to see specific expenses associated with that community, as well as overall taxes, right? So we're fundamentally concerned of, do you have enough annual financial resources between your job and your public assistance to cover your bills? Go to the next slide. I've got a few sort of baby charts, hopefully. This is a world without benefits, right? That if you make more money at your job, going from left to right, you will have more resources, right? If you make an additional $50 a month, you'll have more money in your pocket to sort of pay for your resources. So again, this isn't a perfect world. You go to the next slide. This is actually an example in Nebraska. You go to the next slide. For an adult with 2 children receiving SNAP, the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit, CHIP, and Medicaid. You go to the next slide. And this is sort of how many bumps along the road they might experience, right? So as they go up, they basically, somewhat of an ideal world for about the first maybe $30,000, where if you make more money, you have more net financial resources. But just after you make a little bit more than $30,000, and again, this is very specific, like all these scenarios, to the situation at hand. So we're talking right now about an adult with 2 children receiving those public assistance programs in Nebraska. But a very similar phenomenon happens depending on your household in New Mexico. But right around past $30,000, you're going to hit your first cliff. You can go to the next slide. And that's when you lose Medicaid. And so that's worth, $5,000 to $7,000. Then you're going to hit another cliff. You can go to the next slide. You can go one more. And that's where you hit SNAP. So at this point, you've lost close to $10,000 in benefits. And then go to the next slide. And again, as you make more money, you sort of see again, another cliff in the mid 50,000s where you lose chip. So now you've basically made an additional $20,000 or so, but you've made no headway in the actual benefits cliff. And then you go a couple more on this, right as you approach 60,000, you lose another child care assistance program. And this is the point you've actually hit all your cliffs, but your average net financial resources at about $60,000 are about the same as when you made 25,000. That's how sort of significant this is. So that going from making about $25,000 to $60,000 in this scenario doesn't make your life any better. And again, this is why, again, you see some of those numbers in our surveys with 40% of people turning down sort of advancement because they know that they may hit these cliffs. All right, so you can go to the next slide. Again, to sort of highlight all of these issues, we have created 3 fundamental tools to sort of highlight how these cliff effects work. And they each have a slightly different scenario for use. The most simple cliff is what we call our snapshot. And this is really just looking at a point in time, and again, a change in hours or wages, right? So if you go from making $10 an hour to $12 an hour, how is that potentially going to impact your public assistance? If you go from working 32 hours a week to 40 hours a week, how is that going to impact your public assistance? So very quick and immediate analysis of your situation. The dashboard, on the other hand, that one in the middle, takes a longer term approach and says, all right, if I change careers, what are the long-term trajectories for wages of that occupation, right? If I go from a cashier to a licensed practical nurse, what is that going to do to my wages? And over time, how might that impact my public assistance, right? Because as you make more and more money, you're going to create scenarios in which you're at risk for experiencing cliffs, or maybe not. Maybe you'll see that sort of like everything will work out, and while you may over time lose public assistance, the wage increases that you enjoy might be sufficient to sort of overcome those. So again, whereas the snapshot really shows sort of a point in time, the dashboard takes a longer term approach, looks at maybe a 25-year horizon to look at that impact. And then finally, the planner tool says, all right, the dashboard and the snapshot actually both use sort of local estimates of things like housing costs and childcare, but the planner lets you to go in and create your own budget so that if you are, let's say, at risk for experiencing cliff, you can sort of put that in there, or you can just make it a little bit more accurate, right? The dashboard will assume, let's say that if you have a child that you're paying, it'll estimate the overall childcare costs for the community that you're in. Well, let's say you've got family members that can help provide childcare for you, so you don't need to pay for childcare. The planner lets you go in and create a very detailed budget, so you can sort of zero out the cost for childcare. At the same time, maybe you have student loans or credit card debt that you've got to pay, and maybe that's $100 a month. You can add that in. So the planner allows you to get really granular and sort of making financial decisions based on your actual household expenses with your career trajectory and your public benefits in mind as you make those plans. So again, 3 tools sort of increasingly powerful that hopefully can provide assistance to a variety of workers in a variety of situations. Go to the next slide. Again, as I stated earlier, we are a nationwide initiative. We're working in sort of dozens of communities throughout the country, and we have state partnerships and sort of half a dozen states, predominantly in the Southeast with the statewide partners, but we're always looking sort of to expand and to, again, take this sort of nationally. We have been sort of at this for a couple of years at this point. I think we still have a lot of work to do. We continue to refine the tools that I showed and hopefully deepen our engagements with communities. But the early results have been fairly encouraging. You can go to the next slide. We've had some evaluations conducted of the deployment of our tool, specifically in Florida, Maine, and Connecticut. And in general, right, 70 to 80% of either staff members or individuals using it say that it's helpful in understanding the implications of a career change or a change in hours or wages and how that might impact their benefits, and that they've generally found it to be very helpful in understanding, again, sort of how changes in their personal situation might be manifest or might impact their public assistance. So again, and we'll hear a little bit more, I think, from all this later on this and sort of how it is being deployed. For anybody who is interested, if you haven't used our tool yet, you can go to the next slide. This is sort of a quick primer on our tools. We have some much more in-depth learning videos at this website that'll sort of walk you through how to use all of our tools, give you a little bit more nuance on the core concepts surrounding the benefits cliff issue. They're slightly outdated, but still, I think, very relevant. And we are literally, like, next month going to be filming new videos that will be uploaded by the year's end. Next slide. I also encourage anybody who is interested to find out more about this issue to visit our website at the Atlanta Fed, or reach out directly to me. I am more than happy to set up additional demonstrations to show examples of how our tools work, or if you have any sort of additional questions on the benefits cliff issue. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Adrian.
Thank you, John. Did John say there's no cost to this? Usually I say that about 3 times. If you can believe that, there is no cost to using this. Just a reminder, please put any questions that you have for anyone on the panel in the Q&A, and we'll get those answered as we go along. We'll also have some time toward the end to talk further about that. What I'd like to do at this moment is show you where these tools exist on our website, the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition. So our website is nmdcc.org, up here in the URL. You can see it. And at any time, once you're on the main website, you can just go to the We Provide drop-down box. That's the second drop-down box. Click on Public Assistance Benefits Test, and it'll pull up this page. These are links to, these are URLs that we'll hold them forever, but we want everybody to hold them on their own websites. We think that every state agency should be posting these URLs. Let me just show you a couple. John Reese, toward the end of his presentation, talked about these instructional videos. So, and all of us as staff at the Caregivers Coalition have gone through every single module and just think it's terrific. It's a really good mix of video, hands-on learning, audio by itself, and then even pre and post tests to see about measuring your knowledge before and after. It introduces key concepts, so not only the benefits cliff definition, but things like income self-sufficiency and how that's different from minimum wage jobs. Just really, really good stuff. So that's in the planning tool, and that's right here, the second URL. The first URL that we put on our website is the cliff dashboard itself. And I'm going to click on that. And my own opinion is, I think everybody on this webinar should go use the tools, the training tools first. You're definitely welcome to just jump right in there. But I found that even given that I've been in this field of workforce development for a long time, it helps just to get on the same page with the language that the Fed uses, and how they refer to how they use certain terms. So so I'm sorry. So here are the different tools that John described: the snapshot, the dashboard, and the planner. So you can dig a little bit more deeply into how these are different and how they're similar. These are demo versions of the Cliff Planner. So this was the one that John talked about, how a user can go in here and put in their actual budget. These are office hours. I haven't called the office hours in a while, but I did call about 6 months ago after I had gone through the training tools just to see how the office hours worked. There was a real person who really truly answered, and he told me, he said, it would be really good if you went through the training modules first. So I went back and went through the training modules, and then a few weeks later just called back to see if that person was still working. Indeed, he was. And I think that person would probably have stayed on the phone with me forever to answer any question that I might have had. I wasn't on there for long. Down here a little ways, item 6 is the URL for the state of New Mexico. This is a Human Services Department created link that will sign a person up for all of these different public assistance programs in New Mexico, whether or not, they're already on them. So this is a really good thing if you're helping a client who is low income or is just having trouble or in crisis, this is a really good place to start. Our experience has been that people in crisis probably aren't ready for Cliff, at the outset. They need different problems solved right away. But as things get going, this personal financial form is just another tool that we put down here on our own website to get those people kind of started and on their way. So you can always go, all you need to do is for your own organizational website is kind of lift up these URLs, and once you get comfortable, and place them on your own website for others to use. Just a couple of other examples that I wanted to give you. I talked at the beginning of this webinar about how the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition has used Cliff, New Mexico in our own organization. If you attended any of our informational sessions over this last summer, you will already be ahead of the game in terms of how to use these and why they're important. But it's never not the right time to just jump in there and just play around with them and see how they work and see if they could be useful in any way for the people that you work for or with. I've talked about I've talked about the reimbursement rates that we, as an example of how we use the Cliff tool. But we also held those, like, I think 7 or 8 informational sessions over the course of about 10 or 12 months and demonstrated how people can use these with their own customers and clients. One of those segments of audiences were foundations. Foundations, I found, were really interested in this Cliff tool because of 2 things. A foundation that funds grantees in the state of Texas really was interested in learning how to get Cliff for Texas, or at least for her foundation, so that she could push that out to her different grantees. But I'll tell you of a more local example. Molina Cares Foundation, which is an arm of Molina Healthcare, actually funded New Mexico Caregivers Coalition and asked us to conduct a universal basic income, or otherwise known as a guaranteed basic income program, for 10 caregivers in New Mexico. We loved the idea so much that we then went and found money to offer it to another extra set of caregivers, 20 for a total of 20 caregivers. So we are now nearing the end of that pilot demonstration program, in which every single caregiver has gotten an additional $400 a month, with the requirement that they stay with the employer that they started with. So we're finding out and putting into our evaluation, or writing an evaluation, or we contracted to write an evaluation on how well that program has been working and how these caregivers feel about their levels of financial stress and their sense of well-being. All of these caregivers have had an opportunity to learn about Cliff, New Mexico, and how, as they climb up the career ladder, get additional education for a better career, how their public assistance benefits are impacted or how they might be impacted, whether or not they take that step. So you can just imagine, as was shown in the slide that I showed you, if you're close to making 13,000, 15,000, heck, I think even 25,000 a year, in our state, that would be a very difficult decision to make, but at least you have more information if you were to make that transition. The other example or way I wanted to talk to you about how we're using Cliff New Mexico in New Mexico is we are in partnership with Prosperity Works. We have an individual development account savings program in which state and federal funds are matched. In which a caregiver's own savings are matched with state and federal funds. And then that caregiver in turn, once she has saved for at least 6 months, can then cash out for a home, a business, education. So those of you who know about Prosperity Works, you know that this is their core business. They do and offer and administer in custodial savings accounts, these individual development accounts. And we offer those for caregivers. So every single caregiver who's gone through that program has had the opportunity and still will have before he or she cashes out of the program to learn more about Cliff, New Mexico. And then finally, I wanted to tell you about another example. When we conducted our listening sessions, the 10 of them in southeastern New Mexico over the summer, we heard over and over about the importance of trying to simulate benefits cliffs for caregivers. That's our focus, actually, obviously. Trying to simulate benefits cliffs for caregivers so that they wouldn't have such a hard time going to get that additional education. We always hope in order to get that better paying job within the sector so that they'll stay in the sector. So those are some of the ways that we've used it. I think in our next and kind of final part of our program, we wanted to ask you all, maybe using the Q&A. I think you're also welcome to put in the chat how you could see using Cliff tools for yourself. And Steve, could I just turn this over to you? You just haven't talked enough. And I want to give you the chance for people to know you too.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting, the different both policy and practice initiatives that you described, Adrian, and how they can benefit from and use the Benefits Cliff tools. And just want to point out the individual development account program that you mentioned. In a real way, that is a tool that can help bridge a benefit cliff in a sense. And there are some variations on the IDAs that they're set up correctly, set up in a certain way that the assets within them can be shielded from income eligibility tests for different programs. So it's a perfect fit, really marrying this whole idea of policy and practice. And now the Benefit Cliff tool is a new tool that we can use to deepen that experience even more. But then also, I think, for many of folks on the call, this may be the first time you're really looking at it, or you've been following it, but haven't quite jumped in there yet. I mean, I would really encourage folks, and we're doing this here with a couple of workforce investment boards in Oklahoma, is just having a few of the counselors get together and go through the training. It's pretty quick. Try it out with each other. Get 2 or 3 of your frontline staff to step through it, give them a couple of hours to play around with it, and then check in with them to see what they think. And I think, we'll all be surprised about the different ways that you could see this fitting into your programs. And that would be a really, kind of a concrete way for an organization to say, let's take this next step. Offer up this training as a kind of professional development opportunity for some frontline staff, see what they think about it, and then where that could lead.
Great. So I would like to launch a poll for all of you who are attending and ask you to just please, I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but we would be really happy to follow up with you if you'd like if you'd like the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition to follow up with you or to connect you to different folks, either through the Fed or other states. And so, Dana, would you for us please launch that poll? We do, while this poll is, you should be able to select more than one answer on this poll as you're going through. We do have a question for Marlene Yanez. John, if you could answer that. She asks, how long do each of the trainings take to complete? And then I can answer that as well from my own experience, but you're on mute.
I apologize. I was just say, I'd say anywhere from maybe 40 minutes to an hour and a half each. And there's 4 of them, right? So you can do sort of one in an hour or spend the whole afternoon and knock all of them out. I would probably recommend doing sort of 2 to start out with. The first one is the core concepts and really just provides, again, a little bit more nuance and context to what I presented about sort of some of the fundamental concepts that are going to be presented. And then depending on your use case, moving on to the snapshot, the dashboard, and the planner. How long did it take you, Adrian?
It always takes me longer than it takes most people. I think I did it over about 4 days.
Okay.
I guess if I compressed all the time, it did take about 4 hours. As I recall, there's a post test I have to take at the very end, and I'm trying to remember if I had to get 100 to finish.
It's not 100, but you get and you get a little certificate saying that you've been sort of certified in our Cliff tools.
I had to take it a few times.
We may have made it too hard. So again, we're updating all of that right now. So I'll have to remember that. But it's hopefully very, like, between that, again, I can do sort of additional demos for your organization and those office hours that we have every Tuesday. We do try to make a pretty robust sort of support system for learning how to use our tools. It's also very helpful to us. So I encourage anybody particularly to do either email me directly or to go to that thing on Tuesday, just because sometimes I got a question last week and it turned out there was a small error in wording. Or it helps us identify additional new tools, right? That we've been kind of gradually unveiling new tools over the last 2 years. And so if we keep hearing sort of a similar question or a similar feature that people would like, it makes it a little easier to sort of advocate to including it.
Great. I'll say, Marlene, it's really fun. It's got real snappy little videos. The training has really good, young person, Generation Z videos, I would say. Really nice. Try it out, see what you think. Go ahead.
The other thing I'd say, Adrian, you sort of suggested having counselors use it together. I do think there's a lot of value in that, not just in understanding how to use the sort of overall functionality of the tool. But as you run these, and again, I don't know everything about New Mexico specific just because I do this in so many different communities. But after a while, you do start noticing very like sort of almost wage bands of like, all right, we generally hit, we have a lot of individuals, let's say, that have 1 or 2 children, and that bump from, let's say, $13 an hour to $14 an hour seems to be hitting a lot of people, and that creates a cliff. Or maybe it's $17 to $18 an hour, whatever it might be. You do start sort of being able to identify, which can help you sort of get either the word out or help your workers understand these are some common areas where a lot of our workers are running into this issue.
Very good, thank you. So between 60 and 80% of you have said you would like follow-up from us on putting the Cliff Tool URLs on your website, that you would like help with answering questions on how or why your organization could use Cliff, and 83% said you would like to get connected to other state or local agencies using Cliff. So how about we follow up with you in mid-October? We'll follow up with you in mid-October and make sure that happens for you. Good.
And Adrian, I think another thing for folks on the call to think about is, because I know that the range of folks on the call from different sectors and different organizations, is to think about any conferences that you may have or working groups that you may have where you'd like this to be explained a bit more. I know we've talked about this in workforce development conferences, financial education conferences. Could easily see it in conferences of kind of community colleges, looking at that. So where you could be able to bring this resource into your networks to explore it more together within that context. So it'd be, very risk-free. That'd be a great opportunity to see where it fits in well. And that is an issue that we, community colleges is an area that we haven't really talked about on this call today, but a lot of times TANF programs are embedded in community colleges. When you're with, certain clients for an extended amount of time through a program like that, there's a great opportunity to dig into some of these resources to inform that work. So.
Great ideas. I'm thinking of CNM, who's here. Several people from CNM are at this meeting, and also Spora Nefesh, that advocates for nonprofits here in New Mexico. Great idea. Great. If there aren't any other questions, Steve or John, do you have any other comments?
John, you're on mute.
At some point, I'm going to figure this out. I'm just going to thank everybody again for your time today. We really are excited to get the word out. There's a lot of great work being done in the space, but it's still sort of early days. And so we're very interested to see here, one, how it's being deployed, how people are using it, as I said, because we're always looking to find improvements, but also anything that's going on sort of at the legislative level, right? There's increasingly, I think, a number of states that are looking at and foundations, I think, to Adrian's point. There's a lot of different ways that you can come at this, right? A lot of it is just sort of on one-on-one counseling to help people understand how to navigate that cliff. There are a few foundations and one state, at least that I know of, that are looking into programs on when a cliff is identified, can you make somebody whole for a period of time, right? Just for say, you're going to lose this benefit. Suddenly, maybe a foundation comes in and says, all right, we're going to sort of give that back to you and gradually taper it off over the next 2 years so you can hopefully make a transition. And then in Kentucky, for example, the state recently, kind of similar to the accounts that you were talking about, Steve, has created a scenario in which employers can basically give money in an account that the state manages to pay for employee childcare. And because that is then shielded from the employee, it doesn't create a cliff, right? Like if they had just given them a raise to help them pay for childcare, that might actually make them worse off because they're going to end on a cliff. By creating this mechanism, it doesn't sort of create that risk. And one of the hopes is because Kentucky actually, and I think New Mexico may be similar in certain regards, has one of the lowest labor force participation rates in the country. And so they see this as a way to basically just encourage more and more people to work because of some of the similar things that you're talking about, Adrian. They have an aging workforce, and they have specific sort of occupations that are in demand that have a lot of predominantly like female workers with kids. And so this is an area. So again, all this is all just to highlight the fact that there's just so many ways to, I think, to address this and move the needle on this. And we're very fortunate, I think, to be a part of it and be engaged with organizations like yourself. And so anywhere we can be helpful, we'd really love to work with you all.
Thank you, John. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. I do see two other comments in the chat. Brittany Carnesis, thank you so much. Our community college here in Albuquerque will be launching a statewide SNAP program pilot. We are excited to implement this from the inception. So I think what we should probably do there is just, and maybe Steve, if you want to be connected, Brittany, to Steve and John, we'll follow up with you next week. And then Nelsie, who's had a long history in the foundation world and the social work field, says social worker classes and public health associations. That's a really, really wonderful idea. The health councils. It's good.
Yeah, and that really opens the door to some national partnerships that are being developed around SNAP, ENT programs at the USDA. They've taken a real strong interest in this tool and looking how it can be integrated. So seeing, New Mexico jumping in at the very beginning of a program of how it can be integrated and used, it's a great opportunity. So that's super.
Okay, give you back a half an hour of your day. Thank you
You
so
have a great
much,
evening.
John,
Thanks so
Steve,
much.
Dana, everybody for coming. Thank you very much.
Bye.